It's time to bring out the BetterWorldian in all of us. Welcome to BetterWorldians Radio with your hosts, Ray, Mary Sue, and Gregory Hansel. BetterWorldians Radio inspires you with the people and ideas that are making the world a better place. You'll hear how small acts can make a big difference every day. Now, here are Ray, Mary Sue, and Gregory.
Hi, welcome to BetterWorldians Radio. BetterWorldians Radio is a weekly broadcast whose mission is to uplift and inspire you to make the world a better place. I'm Ray Hansel, joined today by my co-host, Mary Sue Hansel. BetterWorldians Radio is brought to you by Lynch Foundation and is co-hosted by the family team that created the popular social game on Facebook called A Better World. A Better World rewards players for doing good deeds while helping to raise money and awareness for charities. To date, over 40 million good deeds have been done in a better world by more than 4 million people in over 100 countries. Now, today on BetterWorldians Radio, we're speaking with retired U.S. Army Reserve Colonel Dr. Brian Rees. We met Dr. Rees recently at a presentation on how Transcendental Meditation is helping our veterans, and we invited him to be a guest for this special episode in honor of our upcoming Veterans Day. Dr. Rees received his medical degree and master's degree in public health from Tulane University as board-certified family physician. A graduate of the U.S. Army War College, Dr. Rees is a veteran of 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and spent 8 years in hospital commands. He also has researched and written about the promotion of soldier resilience and resolution of PTSD, most recently as lead author of 2 published studies about the effects of Transcendental Meditation practice in resolving post-traumatic stress in Congolese refugees. His most recent book, Detained, was published in 2015. Currently serves as the Director of Operation Warrior Wellness of the David Lynch Foundation and is the National Director of TM4Vets, enhancing the availability of Transcendental Meditation programs for veterans and service personnel.
Hi, Dr. Rees. Welcome to BetterWorldians Radio.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. Now, you're a retired Colonel, Army Reserve doctor. Can you tell our listeners a bit about your experience overseas?
Well, I was, when 9/11 happened, I was in a private practice here in San Luis Obispo, California, and I knew that deployments were coming, and indeed they did. So I spent 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in some ways it was great. In some ways it was very difficult. The family separation is difficult, and of course all the things that one might associate with being in a war zone can be challenging. My assignments mostly were taking care of detainees, as it turned out, which was also challenging but interesting. So I spent time at Abu Ghraib and at the detainee facility in Parwan province in Afghanistan, and then also in Kandahar with a civil affairs battalion, which was a different and very interesting assignment. So it was it was varied and interesting, and I had an opportunity to serve with a lot of wonderful men and women.
Yes, as Ray mentioned previously, we saw your presentation. It really was quite something. I was glad to have seen it. Now, can you tell our listeners about what Transcendental Meditation is and how it became part of your personal life?
Well, Transcendental Meditation, or TM, it's a mental technique. It's practiced for 20 minutes twice a day, just seated comfortably in a chair with eyes closed. It's easy to learn. It's effortless to perform. In my own personal experience, I learned it a long time ago. I was a freshman in college, and it was just by word of mouth. A friend of a friend had learned TM, and it sounded interesting, so I thought, well, I'll give that a go. And I was instructed. The course takes about 4 days. About an hour and a half each day, consecutive, 4 days consecutively. And it was, very simple, very easy. Wasn't really what I expected. It was very different, so I had to kind of adjust myself to think, am I going to continue to to do this. And it took about 2 weeks in my experience before I noticed that there were just very significant changes in my outlook. I hadn't really appreciated it before, but I was very pessimistic, I think. This was back when the war in Vietnam was still going on, and society, then we thought it was very polarized. It's kind of duplicated that these days. But
yes.
But it seemed very, it was a difficult time, and yet it just made me feel a lot better, a lot more optimistic about everything that was going on. So I thought, if it can do that, I'm going to stick with it, and I have for all of these years.
Well, we have to share with our listeners that both Ray and I have been TM meditators for about almost 6 months now, and I do see some of the shifts happening that you've mentioned. A little more positive and more uplifting in your outlook. Now, how do you believe practicing TM helped you during your deployments?
Well, in fairness, it may be hard to say exactly because I didn't have any deployments where I wasn't practicing TM that I can compare, the deployments where I was practicing TM, because I was practicing it through all of them. But I think it helped immeasurably. One of the things that you try to do when you get into a combat zone, you recognize that, and similarly in many careers, in medicine certainly, there are going to be some times when your schedule is going to be dictated to you, and it's going to become very irregular, and you may have to work straight through for 24 or 36 or 48 hours or whatever and not get a chance to take rest. But by and large, most of the time, you have a fairly regular routine. And in fact, often in a war zone, your routine is, can be very predictable. You have a predictable work schedule. You don't really have any family obligations. There's no vacations. There's no, you're not really paying bills and doing all the things that seem to occupy our daily routine. So you enter, what we would call a battle rhythm, where you try to have a predictable and healthy schedule each day, which, for most people are eating healthy. Your meals are provided for you. You don't have to cook anything. And you can either stay up all night and play video games and become stressed and talk to people back home, or you go to bed early, you get up early, you go to the gym, you have regular exercise, you eat healthy. And I found that TM just fit very well into that routine. And then when something awful would happen, we would take casualties, or we'd have service members killed, or whatever the case may be. Rather than kind of spiral down into the misery, you have this technique that you can perform twice a day to kind of reset things and put some tread back on the tire. And so I felt that it helped immeasurably.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how TM can help veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, to start out, can you tell our listeners what exactly is PTSD?
Well, PTSD, with the D on the end, is post-traumatic stress disorder, and so it's a diagnosis. And we're kind of stuck with the D, the disorder part of that diagnosis, because it is part of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version 5, which is the Bible for psychiatric diagnoses, and so trauma-related, anxiety-related diagnoses fall in that category in medicine. So it's a diagnosis that someone may develop if they are exposed to life-threatening situation where they feel that their lives or the lives of someone else that they're with have been, are at risk. And this very highly charged, stressful situation can leave a very deep impression, which then can give rise to a whole constellation of symptoms. And basically the diagnosis is based upon the constellation of symptoms. But, that's kind of the medical, modern 20th and 21st century way of looking at this. Another way of looking at it, which is probably closer to reality, is that post-traumatic stress, it's not really a disorder. It's kind of something that we would expect, that if someone goes to war and has these very intense experiences, they're going to be changed by those experiences. Some of them can be moral injuries, spiritual injuries, having to take someone's life, or having to witness the wounding or death of friends and colleagues. Those experiences are going to change people. And particularly if we combine that with the training that service personnel have gone through, put them through that experience in combat, and then transplant them back into their civilian lives, what they've been trained to do and what's happened to them aren't necessarily congruent with the types of things they have to deal with in civilian life. So it's sort of a mismatch. It's not really what's wrong with somebody. That's what disorder seems to imply, but it's more just what happened to that person. So and when it comes to addressing the benefits of meditation and so forth that we'll talk more about, it is a matter of repurposing the training that soldiers have been through, so that training and those experiences can be employed and repurposed into something beneficial. It's recognized in many cultures throughout civilization that an experience of combat can lead to post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. If it's managed appropriately and if it's reinforced appropriately, it can be a beneficial experience which can lead to wisdom and leadership in society.
Colonel, how prevalent is PTSD? Do you have any percentages for us? You do hear about it, but I never really knew how many were involved.
Well, quite a few. Currently it's estimated that the percentages of service personnel returning from Iraq and Afghanistan who would meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress, it's around between 15 and 20%.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Call it. It's a big number.
Yeah.
And if you think that a couple of million people have served, we're talking about between 250,000 and 500,000 people, and that's from these current wars. And of course, we have probably as many from the war in Vietnam. And of course, as time goes on, we're losing veterans from Korea and World War II, but quite a few of them, of course, also suffered from post-traumatic stress.
Now, how can TM help these veterans?
Well, I think there are probably two ways of looking at that. One is kind of the simple way that we look at TM in our modern culture and modern medical model, and that is that it's a stress reduction technique. It provides a very deep state of rest. The mind has an active state with which we're all familiar because that's what we attend to most of the time, day in and day out, from the time we wake up in the morning till the time we go to bed at night. We're busy thinking about things, and we have this very active aspect of mind. But it also has a silent aspect, and that is something that we tend not to experience very much. We don't seem to value it that much in our culture, but it's available. And the mind and body are intimately connected, so if the mind settles down, which is what this technique allows people to do, when the mind settles down, the body takes a very deep state of rest, and that rest is very restorative and can release these deeply rooted stresses that can occur not just in combat, but also just in the slow burn of stressful modern living. So that's one simple, somewhat superficial way of looking at it. But most of the studies that have been done with regard to TM over the decades have documented that it provides this very deep state of rest, and rest helps to release and address stress. So that's one simple way of looking at it. But I think another subtler way is to recognize that this active state of mind, when we allow the mind to settle down in the meditation and become less and less active, it can become very inactive, very quiet, and can experience its own inner nature, which is free of all of the clutter and cluster of thinking. So we transcend gross conscious thinking, and we can transcend these subtler levels of thought and can transcend thought altogether and just experience the source of thought, this field of consciousness, which is at the basis of all of our thoughts and experience. It's an experience which is very subtle, very charming. It's inner restful alertness, wakefulness without content. You're not asleep. You're awake inside, but not thinking all these thoughts. And that experience is a field in which there are no conflicts. There's nothing irreconcilable. There's none of this, I should have done this and I could have done that, and I just can't live with the fact that my friend was killed and I wasn't, and I should have been able to do something and I didn't, or I did something and after I pulled the trigger I couldn't bring that round back and it, hit the wrong person and I have to live with that. All these things that can be very awful that veterans just find, just very difficult to live with. When they experience that very subtle experience inside, which is without conflict, it has a restorative effect and helps them to appreciate, not on the level of thinking about it, but on the level of their own experience, that their own inner nature is free of conflict. And that seems to be very restorative, and I think that's at the basis of the benefits that we see for veterans with post-traumatic stress.
Well, both Mary Sue and I can speak to the efficacy in a situation which is not a war zone. So we can only imagine the positive impact that the kinds of things that we're experiencing in a just day-to-day stressful world that we live in here could so much more effective and helpful in the strife-filled centers of war zones for our veterans. So we're going to talk more with Dr. Brian Rees about how Transcendental Meditation can help, and actually is helping veterans who are suffering from PTSD in a moment. But right now, I'd like to take a brief break, to tell our listeners a little bit about our game on Facebook called A Better World. A Better World encourages habits of goodness, positive mindsets, and giving to social causes to make a positive difference in the world. Players in the game do things like express gratitude, share acts of random kindness, send get-well notes to real-world sick children, and many, many more. Each month we partner with a different charity and challenge our players to do a certain number of good deeds within the game. When they do, which they have always done, we release funds to our charity partner of the month. We'd like to congratulate our players for a successful partnership with Integral Heart Foundation. Because our players completed over 150,000 good deeds last month, we released funds to provide meals for 60 students in their Guatemala facility for an entire month. And we're excited to announce that Dining for Women is our charity partner of the month for November. When our players reach our Do Good goal there, we'll release funds for grassroots projects in developing countries to empower women and girls and promote gender equality. You can find out more at betterworld.com. Now let's get back to our conversation with Dr. Brian Rees. Brian, PTSD is a pretty serious disorder. Is there evidence that TM can really have an impact here?
Yes, there is. We have a number of studies, probably about half a dozen or so at this point, which have documented that TM can help post-traumatic stress. Some of these are fairly high quality. The two that you had mentioned in the introduction that I had an opportunity to participate in had to do with Congolese refugees in Uganda. And there we took these refugees and randomized them either to learn TM or to be on a waitlist control. After 30 days, 90% of the ones that had been randomized to learn TM and had been instructed in TM had marked reduction in their post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. Matter of fact, they fell from a highly stressed level down to a level that is recognized as being quote-unquote non-symptomatic. So they had marked improvement in their symptoms, and those were sustained over 4 months. And then in a follow-up study, we looked at some of our waitlist controls and replicated our 30-day data, and then also found that about two-thirds of the benefit that was going to come within that first month actually occurs within the first 10 days. So it was very, very prompt. It's been studied in the VA and among veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. It's been studied in Vietnam veterans. The first study was published back in 1985. So we have some good data to show that it helps consistently. It has been shown to help. Now, those data, the volume of research is not as extensive. It doesn't involve the hundreds of people who've been involved in the studies that have looked at the current gold standard treatments that are being offered in the VA and DoD. But there was a study just last year which showed that the current gold standard treatments for veterans who have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, who are enrolled in those treatments and complete the best treatments that the current medical model has to offer, 2/3 of those veterans retain the diagnosis after they've completed treatment. So our current gold standard treatments are they're helpful for some people. They're offered by people who are highly motivated to do good, but they're not quite satisfactory. So I think we do have good evidence. The effect sizes in our studies with TM are actually as large, if not larger, than those of the gold standard treatments. And so I think it needs to be in the conversation for veterans with post-traumatic stress.
Absolutely. Can you share a story of someone you've worked with who personally benefited from TM?
Well, I could share a number of them. I think I'll, for privacy's sake, maybe I'll sort of smush a couple of, few guys together. But let me mention a couple of guys, and they had a similar experience. These were combat veterans who had lost friends, and both of them, as it turns out, had the unfortunate experience of being in ambushes, and the order was that if anything is moving out there, that's not us, because we're all here. So anybody else are bad guys, and go ahead and fire. And as fortune would have it, they saw movement, saw a person, and fired, and it turned out to be a child, who obviously isn't what they had in mind when they pulled the trigger. But once that round starts going down range, there's nothing you can do about it. So they had to live with that, and that's just about as bad as it gets. As far as you sign up, you go through whatever you went through in your childhood, and pre-morbid, post-traumatic stress is a common experience, especially in our all-volunteer force, which sort of economically is driven to select individuals who are, not rich and not well off, and many of them don't have the best background that they've come from before they enter the military, and they enter with the idea of serving, and they go to serve, and then they have some just awful experience like this in combat, which just exacerbates this post-traumatic stress. So that's something that's hard to talk yourself through and talk yourself out of. That that's what happened. There's no getting around it. There's no undoing it. So they just felt terrible. And and a curious thing, just to kind of follow through on that, each of them, of course, feels terrible about himself and has no excuse for what he did. Of course, if you talk to the one guy about the other guy and say, well, this guy also did this, I mean, he must be, he should probably feel awful too. And of course, no, he shouldn't feel awful. There's nothing he could have done about it. It absolutely was not his fault. It's just the hand that he was dealt, and they're exactly right about that, but they'll be very unforgiving to themselves. So, in any case, they learn TM and have this experience without talking about, you shouldn't feel guilty about this. It wasn't your fault. The fortunes of war and all that sort of thing, which are just on the superficial level of talking, and it can be helpful, but it really doesn't get at that core level where the stress is located deep inside. But when they have this experience of this field of consciousness, which lies at the source of thought and underlies all of experience, and in that field, all of these conflicts are unified and reconciled. And it's not an intellectual exercise. It's just something that they experience, and the qualities of that infuse into their lives. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Doesn't mean that they can't recognize what an awful thing it was. The memories are still there, but it's just the difference between having the memories still there and having to live there intrusively day in and day out, having these thoughts coming all throughout the day and interrupting sleep at night. That was very liberating for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was just a PBS special on the other night about a specific portion of the Korean War that when MacArthur was still involved, and some of the terrible weeks-long attacks and massive casualties on both sides, and just the trauma. And the people that were actually asked to participate in recounting their memories were in their 70s, and I would venture to say maybe at this point in their 80s or so. And when they recounted these battles, it was as fresh as if they just came from it. So you could see that had they had that opportunity all these years, even going back that far, as I think you mentioned earlier, the Korean War and the Vietnam War, et cetera, that there could have been an impact. So I'm really excited to see, as we move forward, how we can bring TM to the veterans in much bigger way. Now, for the veterans suffering from PTSD, to get involved with this, there's some cost usually associated with. How do they get underway with this?
Probably the best way to start would be to go to the website, tm.org, and that will get them plugged in. They can look at what's there. There are links there to TM4Vets. Also, they could go to the David Lynch Foundation website, and there are links there to the military, and they can go through there and without having to talk to anybody. If they don't want to, jump in and have someone, try to sell them something, they don't have to do that. They can just go to this website, look through, and look at what veterans from their own service and their own rank and their own wars are saying about what their experience has been. And then if it resonates with them, there's an opportunity to put your zip code in, and it will search, and it will put you in touch with a teacher. Now, there is typically there's a fee to learn TM, because the TM teachers have to live and pay the rent and all that like anyone else. But we do have this philanthropic model now, particularly through the David Lynch Foundation, which wherein we try to raise money and then have that money pay for the cost for instruction for populations at risk, such as veterans and first responders and runaways and other people who are at need for this technique but may not be of the means to pay for it. Now, of course, if somebody he's gone into business and he's a millionaire, then go ahead and pay full retail, do it. But it's the policy of the organizations that are teaching TM not, to do their very best, not to turn away vets. And then we've been pretty successful at that, being able to raise the money to pay for instruction for any veteran who wants to learn TM.
Yeah, for our listeners, we recently highlighted Bob Roth, who heads up the David Lynch Foundation. So you can also go to BetterWorldians.com and see or listen to the program that highlights the work that David Lynch, the famous film producer, has done to bring TM to the masses of people that might otherwise not afford it. And I think the veterans are part and parcel of that. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Now, you wrote a book called Detained, which you profiled at this presentation recently that we saw was really good, excellent book, and also you presented it in such a way that it made it very compelling. But along the way, you also indicated that you're donating all the profits from the book. Can you tell our listeners about the two programs in TM that will benefit and how people can purchase the book?
Right. Well, to start with the last point first, as far as purchasing it, you can do it online, at Amazon or any online retailer that's your favorite one. You can go ahead and find it there. Again, the title of it is Detained. I'm the author. The subtitle is Emails and Musing from a Spiritual Journey Through Abu Ghraib, Kandahar, and Other Garden Spots. So that subtitle will make it fairly unique. Aren't many other books named that. So you can get hold of the book that way, or you can walk into a brick-and-mortar store, and if they don't have it on the shelf, then you can ask them and they'll order it for you. So whichever way you want to do it, that's a way to get hold of it. And all of the profits from the book will go to support programs for veterans that are looking to make Transcendental Meditation more available and accessible for veterans. So it would go either to the David Lynch Foundation or to TM4Vets. Those are the two organizations that are most involved in promoting this. Again, the David Lynch Foundation is kind of the philanthropic arm that looks to raise money to help pay for instructions. And then TM4Vets is the organization that actually does the execution and gets the teachers in the right place for institutional programs and can help farm money out for scholarships and grants and so forth to help local centers support their local veteran population.
Excellent, excellent. So we ask this question of all of our guests each week. So how do you hope that TM can help make the world a better place for veterans with PTSD?
Well, there are three things that come to mind. One is what we've already talked about, this remediation of post-traumatic stress, which, by helping redress these deeply rooted stresses, allow these veterans to become the people that they really are, to become the people that they want to be. They want to be a loving husband or wife, father, mother. That's the person they want to be, and yet this stress gets in their way, and the training that they've had that hasn't been repurposed, that hasn't been channeled in the right way, tends to flare up at times that seem to be inappropriate for our civilian lives. So as we remediate that, release that stress, and can repurpose that training, then we find that people get along better. They become that loving husband and father. They get along better with their family members, and they don't self-medicate and isolate. They become more engaged, and they have this wealth of experience, and they have been to the most severe school. They are ready to contribute to society and demonstrate leadership in society once they kind of get out from behind this 8-ball. So remediation of post-traumatic stress, that's the one area that I think it can help. Another area is the prevention of post-traumatic stress. This meditation traditionally in the tradition that it comes from, the Vedic tradition of India, it was first given to the warrior caste. It was out of a recognition that warriors are the ones who need it the most. They have to be able to be orderly inside on the level of their own awareness, and they have to be able to propagate that orderliness within society. And then if disorder breaks out, they have to be the ones to restore order, and sometimes that involves close combat with an enemy. And if you're going to do that and perhaps have to take someone else's life, you need to have the broadest and most settled awareness to be able to do that only when it's appropriate, put limits on it, do it in the right way, and then recover from that. So I think my fantasy is that as time goes on, a decade from now or two or however many, that Transcendental Meditation will be available as part of entry-level training for anyone who is going to become a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or policeman, because they are often subject to the same stressors that people have in combat.
Certainly.
And then there is a chapter in the book which derives from the research paper that I wrote for the master's degree that you get when you graduate from War College, which has to do with the effects of group practice of an advanced technique of Transcendental Meditation, which has been shown not only to have these beneficial effects of restoring order in a meditator's family and a small group that he works with and lives with, but groups of persons practicing this advanced technique can be inserted into hotspots, and this has been done over 51 times and has reproducibly had this effect in a very predictable way. That having these groups go into areas of stress and distress in combat zones and elsewhere, they have the effect of changing the trends of time within that society, of decreasing combat deaths, decreasing conflict, promoting coherence, promoting beneficial effects in society. So that would be a great effect to have. Then we could reduce the stressors that tend to lead to these societal outbreaks, which tend to put our young men and women at risk and put them in harm's way in combat zones.
Excellent. Really wonderful work. You can learn more about Dr. Rees's work by going to TM4Vets.org. Dr. Rees, thanks so much for joining us today on BetterWorldians Radio. This was a great program, and I think that the work that you're doing and the TM is doing is extraordinary. So I'm happy to be a part of profiling it on today's special broadcast in honor of our Veterans Day upcoming celebration.
Great. Thank you very much. It was great to be with you.
Very welcome. Very welcome. BetterWorldians Radio is brought to you by BetterWorldians Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to make the world a better place by encouraging the very best in everyone. Essentially, we believe in planting flowers, not just pulling weeds. So we focus on positive thinking, positive values, and positive actions. In short, our vision is to bring out the BetterWorldian in everybody so that we can all make it a better world. But we can't do it all without your help. So donations support our BetterWorldians Radio podcast as well as go towards developing new features like articles, videos, blogs, and more. Go to BetterWorldians.com to view our many, or to listen to our many broadcasts. I think we've had over 110, 115 of them so far. And become a part of this important mission. And until next time, everyone, please be a better Worldian.